I grew up very much inner city in Chicago, kind of late 50s, very early 60s. Been an immigrant family in a neighborhood that had immigrants, which was southern Italy and from Eastern Europe, and making their way, kind of coming from what Al Pacino called the lower mids, the lower middle class, that upper working class, lower middle class, kind of breaking into the American system, as they could. So it's less about a fascination than it is about an environment. You knew that the cigar store, had a card room in the back. There's names in the newspapers. It's very, very much a Chicago thing in the sense that front page came out of Chicago, came out of that sensibility. Mike Royko's column, writing about this famous family of thieves who were kind of tragicomic, the Pansco family, 3 brothers and a sister, So it became it's kind of the lore of the city, as it were. So in terms of knowing about it, it was in the air. It was just part of life on the streets.
Michael and I had a mutual friend in Chicago whose name was Nate Grossman. He said that he had a friend of his who wanted to do law enforcement, police genre stuff. And here I'm a cop wanting to be a writer, and Nate thought, wow, I got to put these 2 guys together. Chuck
and I became very close friends, and Chuck was a detective in Chicago in a major crime unit. Every city has one major crime unit. In LA, it's the Robbery Homicide Division. In Chicago, it was a CIU. And then through Chuck particularly, started hearing his encounter with the real Neil McCauley.
Neil McCauley was 49 years old the day we met, and he had already served 25 years in the penitentiary. Of that 25, 8 of it was on Alcatraz, and 4 years on Alcatraz in isolation, what they called the hole. The conversation took place almost 40 years ago now. Knowing his background as I did, I'm not going to rehabilitate this man, okay? And I know that going in. So I said to Neil, why don't you go somewhere else and cause trouble? And he said, I like Chicago. It was just real simple stuff. So I said to Neil, you realize that one day you're going to be taking down a score and I'm going to be there. Then he said, well, look at the other side of the coin. I might have to eliminate you. And I remember the very last thing I said to him was, I'm sure we'll meet again. I just said to myself, I wonder where this is going to lead us.
Chuck had cut into the crew, knew the crew was going to do a burglary of a department store. And when Neil McCauley went in, there was one thing that was out of place. He had scoped out the score ahead of time, and he knew everything that was supposed to be there in terms of vehicles and parking lots and everything else. And Neil McCauley didn't know what was wrong, but he knew something was wrong.
I had 2 detectives on the inside of the store. And once you get into a place like that, you can't move around. It's discipline like you've never known, believe me. And it was later that night, it was maybe 5 or 6 hours later, and we had men all around on the outside. And we get a call on the walkie-talkie that the crew's here. So this is going to go down, And of course, you're inside, and now that here comes this moment that you've dreaded for so long in so far that you realize that maybe if things don't go absolutely right, you can get hurt or, God forbid, killed. They moved in to the downstairs area, which there was a little basement area in the back of this store, and they just sat there for maybe 5 or 10 minutes listening to see if there's any movement. So now the really damaging thing is, now he knew someone was on him. And prior to that, they didn't know anyone was on them.
Well, that kind of self-discipline, that kind of real professionalism, Chuck admired. And he would say, look how great this guy, look how cool this guy is to figure this out, look how smart he is to see that and pull back and never go back, even though Neil McCauley had invested $30,000, $40,000 in setting up the score. He was walked away from the score and was never going to go back, was never going to take it, because it was a risk versus reward equation. And because one thing was out of place, the risk component just skyrocketed. If Chuck was a thief, what struck me was Chuck's sociopathic perspective about it. It's not sociopathic in Chuck's, but if Chuck had been a thief, it would have been sociopathic. What struck me about it was the duality. And that's not what one encounters in fiction. That Chuck had tremendous regard for this guy, had a lot of respect for him, was fascinated by him intellectually, thought the guy was terrific.
If I didn't know who he was and know as much about him as I did, then, I would have probably thought that, he's probably a halfway decent guy.
In fiction, you would think, well, that means that there's a rapport, that maybe he'll cut him some slack. And that wasn't the case at all. Not even one iota of it. Not even a hesitation. Chuck would hesitate not 1 second, dropping a hammer and killing McCauley, which he did subsequently in 1964.
There's a supermarket at 47th and Cicero. It was a day that they did their check cashing. So the armored car dropped off a lot of cash. We had tailed Neil McCauley's crew endlessly. And then the next thing you knew, they drove into the parking lot, and 3 of them came out of the car and went in. In the windows of this supermarket, they had all these advertisements. We could still see all the people and put their hands in the air and what have you. So we knew that it was going down at that time. And then we didn't try to go in. There were too many people inside. It would have been awful. As they came out the door, they spotted my partner and I coming across the street with guns in our hands, and they opened fire at us. But then it was a foot chase, and we got them individually in between gangways of homes was where we finished them.
It was fortuitous that I met Chuck Adamson, who then introduced me to John Santucci and a number of other, and a whole network of people. And I always took these people in one way or another. If they could act, I had them act in these things. So Bill Brown, who was one of the thieves who stole the Marlboro Diamond out of London, has a big speaking part in Thief, and Chuck had a speaking part. And one of Chuck's partners, Dennis Farina, who at the time was still a detective in the Chicago Police Department, had a role in it.
Charlie Adamson called me from Las Vegas and told us that Michael Mann was going to come to Chicago and that he wanted to meet with us, and he wanted some technical advice in preparation for the movie. So myself and some other guys, we took him around and introduced him to some people. Charlie more so than anybody else.
I started him out from the police side of things. And then he would ask me questions in terms of the relationship between professional thieves and cops. And he came out with this very clear, distinct picture of who's who.
He knew these people. He knew the criminals and he knew the cops. He knew them. And he loved them both. And you could feel it in him. There's real respect, oddly enough, for both sides of the law in Michael.
And I think he was more interested in the personal life and how the job was the wedge, that eventually deteriorated the relationship and it broke up. So he was very interested in that.
Being a police officer is going to change somebody. It's going to change their personality, the way they interact with people after they've been a police officer for some time because of what they see. They just see nothing but, for the most part, the bad side of human nature.
I described the job as many times your eyes were forced to see more than your soul could take.
How else do you do this type of work unless you find that it rejuvenates you in some way, because it's too dark a profession.
It's a very sexy, alluring thing, and you can get caught up in it because it becomes a challenge. You say to yourself, I'm not going to let this person get away with that if I have anything to do with it. And that's what starts eating away at relationships, where you start thinking, well, I'd rather go follow this guy to find out what happens than to meet my wife at 8 o'clock for dinner. So you sacrifice one for the other. And oftentimes you justify it by saying this is a bad guy, and if I get him off the street, I can help somebody. But a lot of people don't understand that.
Then you have the policeman who deals with this stuff day in and day out and gets so far into the criminal mentality, and that becomes their milieu, that sometimes they become almost indistinguishable.
There's always a thing they always say about cops sometimes that on the other side takes one to know one. There's a certain element of, a cop that understands the criminal mentality in order to be able to even deal with them, so it's like another side of the coin.
You've heard the expression, the line is very thin, and it probably is, in the sense that you have to think like a thief to catch a thief.
Crime is as it's as possible as anything you could imagine. And meeting some of the guys that really do this, it was pretty exciting.
It used to be years ago when I was coming up, people who wanted to be thieves, they learned how to be a thief. They learned how to do things slick. They learned how to deal from the bottom of the deck. They learned how to go through the roof of a building with a drill and bit and a circular saw. They learned how to punch, peel, and burn open safes.
There was a creative aspect to these guys, and they're very interesting guys. Bright, very charming. There's a certain moral code that they carry that's quite interesting and respectable in many ways. But of course, they're criminals.
Everything's about making that big score. So you don't have to work for the man. You don't have to go back to prison. You're going to make this one big score, get this nice big chunk of money, and retire to an island somewhere.
It's the doing of it is the juice. It's like playing, I played football. It's like, knocking some guy's brains out when he's coming across the middle is the juice, Winning is fun too, but you want to knock that guy's ass, and, you want him to know that, come over here again, I'm going to try and kill you. We're playing football, baby. This isn't, it's real.
It's someplace that has a value. The criminal, it provides everything. It provides wealth, it provides comradeship, it provides status. It fills in all the things on the other side that you should get for society on a very petty level, usually, Actually, the kind of gang that he had in Heat, sometimes there's no mob like that operating in the United States, and at the most there's one or two. It's here many of those scores, those big scores like that. Because if you've got enough money to take off that kind of a score, to set it up, you don't need to steal, you know what I mean?
Everybody who's a professional criminal knows they're going to jail or going back to jail. You're going to the joint. So you have peace of mind then. You know where you're at. And if you die good, I'm tired of this way of living, this angst, or I had a good run. These guys know they're alive and they're crazy.
I can only imagine when you get out, you say, you know what, I'm never going back in. All right, I'm going to straighten out my life and I'm just going to move forward. The realization is when you get out, nobody wants you to go straight. Nobody wants to give you a break. You're an ex-con.
So these stories that I heard and became kind of apocryphal and rich, I have always found when you find those rare events, I find them more dynamic and more exciting than what one can make up. Those are very fascinating people.
Heat reminded me of a Greek tragedy. It had so many legs, so many threads, and then it all began to pull in together.
These are morality tales, in a sense. I think they are morality tales, and it's ways of examining the human personality and their weaknesses,
Heat, in my opinion, is the culmination of about 20 years of research on Michael's part.
You went to Michael Mann's world, and you felt it was, no matter where we were in location, there he was, and it was his world.
Heat is like watching reality. It's like watching the 6 o'clock news, only amped up. 100%.
A premise for me or that I had about the whole of the film, and that goes all the way back to the writing, which was that just as each person is a universe unto himself, everybody has a life. We tend to two-dimensionalize antagonists in a motion picture. To me, they're much more fascinating if I and the actors and everybody else have the ability to imagine and expand and inflate that into the dimensionality of a life. So that was the idea in Heat. When you do what I do, this is what gets you going. First time I decided to write it, I was writing television, and I hadn't even directed Jericho Mile yet. So the chance of me directing this was remote. But it was one of those stories that I felt was such a complex fabric that it would have to really be compressed, particularly thematically. Like what's the movie about? What's it really about? I took about 40% of the script and decided to do it as a television movie, just to work with the material, because I was drawn to it. So I wound up doing LA Takedown.
It was shot originally, as a pilot possibility of being a television show. The story certainly generally the same, but there's so many other pieces that, you didn't have in LA Takedown that were in Heat that made it a complete film.
If I'd gone to television series, it would have been interesting, that'd have been a nice use of the material, but I'd always planned to make a large motion picture out of it. And it was kind of a prototype, because it was a television shooting sketch. I think I shot it in 17, 18 days, so it was kind of a sketch. And then after that, about 2-3 years after that, I was having breakfast with my friend Art Linson, and the subject came up. I said, well, man, you ought to read the whole screenplay, So I gave him the screenplay. And it was absolutely Art who said to me, you're crazy. You should do this as a feature film right now. This should be your next film. And that was absolutely Art's encouragement that caused me to do it.
I read the script and I went, oh, fantastic, perfect. Bob De Niro for this villain, fantastic. And at the time, I said, I think we can get Bob to do this.
Art went after Bob, I went after Al. Those were our first two choices about who should play these parts. Both guys said yes, and that was it, And then I had, what was nice about it is that it had not been developed anywhere, and I owned my own material. So I had a screenplay, and we had a director, and we had a producer, and we had Bob and Al.
I remember Michael showing me this relatively classic story of a pursuit. I remember thinking when I read it that I thought the part that was right for me was the cop. And so I was happy that he wanted me to play the cop.
The style of Vincent Hanna is an Al Pacino style, It's more Baroque. The way he works witnesses, the way he works informants, the way he'll disorient the informant he's with, and making sure that the informant is never on terra firma.
I thought that I would need to be a little bit more hyper than Robert's character. We came up with the idea that my character chipped cocaine. We sort of formulated the character to be that kind of person so that every once in a while he would explode, And it's a good thing to know that. It's not in the picture, but that's part of what motivated him from time to time. He was a little high. I went out on a limb with that character, can sometimes go a little bit histrionic, a little bit too far. But Michael encouraged it and understood it in relation to the kind of movie we were making and the yin and yang of what Robert was doing, what I was doing.
In most of these situations, it's easier to portray the thieves and the criminals than it is Hanna. And for a long time, I didn't really have Hanna as an equally complex character who had his own dynamic.
It's the journey, not the destination with Hanna. The journey is a hunter. And once he gets a scent of his prey, it sort of self-motivates him and it perpetuates him.
Hanna is addicted to this process. This is an elevated state.
I think he found solace in that world, a certain peace there. As strange as it was, as scary as that world is, he was happiest there. He felt at home there.
Art Linson gave me the script and said, read this, I think you'll find it interesting, and I just liked it. I came in first in terms of I committed to the project, and it was Al. And if it had been reversed and he said he was doing Neil, I know I would have gone in on it. But I mean, the one scene like the one that Al and I have is a terrifically written scene. I said, it'll be fun to work on this one.
The fusion of Robert De Niro and Neil McCauley is so total. I can't imagine pulling those two identities apart and telling you why Bobby was right for it. He's committed to the rigidity of that, perspective. And it's a heartbreaking role. It's a tragic, tragic character. What was interesting to me and what's important is that he's autodidactic, he's self-taught, and he elected to have this rigid perspective. Because it's rigid, if he deviates from it, then the repercussions are rigid. And the reason for that is completely practical. It's no other reason, and that is because whatever you're attached to will make you deviate from the most efficient, practical actions.
In his world, what he's doing, he feels justified in doing it. And the old thing with, with actors, acting is you always have to like your character, more or less. You have to justify what they're doing and feel that it's possible that they could do this, otherwise there's no point in doing it.
I see who he is when all that robbery goes awry, and then I try to escape from him. And then that scene where he's kneeling, and I think for his character to kneel in front of a woman, that's where the hope was, but you don't escape, you just don't escape.
Well, she's important to Neil because Neil wasn't, he's doing everything by the book, and life doesn't work that way, Neil goes with this program that he has for himself. And he gets sidetracked by something that he never expected, which is usually when those things happen, I guess.
The thing that was great about the idea of Bob doing this is he creates a character you start to root for even in his badness. That's a very hard thing to do. Very few actors can do it. By the end of the movie, you almost want him to live instead of Al Pacino. It's part writing, it's part what Michael did, but it's considerably part of what Bob did.
Characters are defined by behavior, not necessarily what they say, but what they do. And once Michael directs you into the inner workings of De Niro's character and you understand him and you see him grow and evolve where he can't walk away, which has been his life philosophy, he falls in love. You pull for him because there's love right there dangling, but he turns and he goes back and you just go, oh my God. But Michael gets you so involved in the character's inner workings because he knows every single layer of every character that's on screen.
Michael's interested in the moment, that moment when what you decide will impact your life forever. You will be a different person. If you do this, you will forever be diminished. Or if you do that, you will maintain your integrity and dignity as a human being.
The thing that struck me that was so special about what Michael had achieved there, and I know in his case it's intentional, is he made no judgment about who was good and who was bad.
One of the things that interested me a lot in building the characters that are inside the film was to individualize every part, including small parts. So therefore, I wanted as much polarization in the casting of every single part. So you felt that every single person was, as in fact each person is, a total individual, a universe in and unto themselves.
Every aspect of the story, no matter how seemingly small, had to be really authentic, which meant that the actors portraying those aspects of the story had to be authentically really incredible actors.
The casting process didn't finish. He was shooting the movie and we were still casting. As a matter of fact, it went on for a long time, in a good way, because we get some very interesting characters.
I didn't know if I wanted to do it right away, and I talked to Michael. I said, Michael, you know, this character is very specific, and I think there are guys walking around that you could get to be very authentic for this character. He said, yeah, but John, you know, then we wouldn't get a chance to work together. That was such a nice compliment to me, you know, that he wanted to work with me. And with that said, I said I'd throw in and do it with him, you know.
Michael knows exactly what he wants, which is really great to have if you're acting. His attention to detail and his involvement with every aspect of it is very strong, and you can feel him in every part of the film, which is basically what his job is. I mean, that's your job when you make a movie, is to have people feel what you're feeling.
And there are many things that actors usually have to concern themselves with that really aren't their job, but they're just things in order to create a whole character, and he's just thoroughly involved in every single aspect. He takes the time, he works out the film experience so that it's ideal.
This is based on observations. This is based on people I've met, people I've known, people I've sat with and talked to. Thieves, cops, killers in certain respects. So it's based on content. It's not based, and it's not derived from other cinema. It's based on some basic research and stuff.
For the research that he wanted on the convicts, he never said, you know, hold back, don't do this, don't do that. It was always go as far as you can go. Talk to the most extreme people you can talk to, as many as you can, get as much information as you can.
They hired me as a technical consultant. They gave me some stuff, but really they gave one of my books, Be So Fierce, to all the bad guys, the De Niro mob, you know, and had them read it because it tells it like it is. You know.
We visited a lot of guys in prison. We went to Folsom and met guys who did this type of thing. One of them had a lot of money and got caught robbing a bank. And I said, why did you continue to do it at a certain point? I mean, risk versus reward again. And he said, it was my job. It's what I knew how to do. You know, I robbed banks.
I spent some time with a lot of women who were involved with men who were in prison, and they were fascinating, some really sad stories involved with a man who was already in prison or who went to prison while they were, and just getting that whole dynamic as understood as I could.
We sat around and listened to cops talk, and I realized quite early that women were not that important, you know. I felt pretty much second class.
In preparation for Heat, I used to go out with Tom Alfmont, who was a commander in LAPD at the time, and we would just routinely answer radio calls. Whenever there was something going on, we'd go there, you know, whether there's a homicide, an armed robbery in progress, whatever was happening. And it took us all over the city. And that's how I really learned all about LA.
I mean, he got to the point where sometimes on a couple things calls we went on, I mean, I always had 2 guns, so sometimes I would hand him a gun because he almost became like a partner.
Michael used to like to stage things so that his actors could see what it was really like. Michael staged some interrogation scenes that John Santucci and I did for them.
The thing that happens with certain directors that you really are, at the top of their game is you feel this confidence and you feel as though you can go in there and they'll take care of the situation. They'll take care of you and they'll take care of the authenticity. They will try to go after the best you have in you.
I wanted everybody really well-trained so that they felt that they could actually do what the characters in this film do, because actors responded in a very big way. Mick Gould and Andy McNabb designed the curriculum by which Val Kilmer and Bobby De Niro and Tom Sizemore would acquire the skills that they had to acquire, and then there was a different curriculum for the cops.
The preparation for the bank heist was in 2 parts. Obviously, there was the getting into the bank and creating the robbery, and secondly was the gunfight outside.
We cased the entire joint. I went up and got a loan application, just the way they would figure out what's going on in this bank. It was a trip, how much knowledge we got, and they didn't know what was going on.
So they were in disguise, obviously because they're actors, everybody would know them otherwise. They went in, carried out their task, got in the vehicles, and we drove off. And when we got the tapes back from the bank, no one had been seen. So from the actor's point of view, they know that when they were going to do it on the film, they've already done it in real time, so they felt a bit more comfortable with what they were doing.
Everybody took this movie really seriously. And then when we were, in the planning stages of robberies and stuff, you really got that feeling, this is the way it is. This is how you do it.
Some of the actors thought they knew how to handle weapons, and they were, disabused of that notion. I mean, it was one whole day of safety before anyone was allowed to fire a round.
We took each individual actor and trained him how to use the weapons. When we were on the ranges, we had actually cops teaching cops. So it kind of divorced everybody. So the bad guys were bad and the good guys were good, and they had the correct training.
I've never experienced anything like this. He had us out on the range to learn how to shoot guns. I've done it before. You practice, you learn, people teach you how to do it, where it goes and stuff. Only I've never done it with real bullets.
Actually, I heard something that was very flattering, that there's a shot where I run out of bullets and I change the mag and I go back to firing. I think it's the Marines. They show the clip telling those maggots, if you can't change your clip as fast as this actor, then get out of my army.
Everything you see on the film was done live on the ranges in Orange County, on the police ranges. It was basically 3 months of training, slowly building up, so there'll be 3 or 4 of them on the range, actually firing really close up, moving around, and hitting targets as well.
I was able to build the actual street to scale. We're using flats on the sheriff's ranges and train the guys to actually do everything they do, moving from station to station.
We shot all that live on the range before we actually did it with blanks downtown. So we did it for real and then went downtown and pretended.
Pretty much everything that we do in the story, short of actual murder, we did off camera.
Val and I knew each other a little bit, but in these training exercises and everything, we got to know each other, and it's kind of has a lot of levels when you do this. You get to know the person, you get to get a sense of who they are, so that you're communicating and creating a relationship, which you can use, a familiarity that you can use when you're doing the scenes together.
When we were shooting the sequence that involved the robbery of the armored truck and then the aftermath with the death, I mean, the people who were actually there, extras on the set, were true detectives, were true investigative forensic technicians. So you're dealing with people who really know how to do their job, and that brings a level of reality to a scene that otherwise you wouldn't get.
The experience of being on that set for any director, any actor, was electric. And so there's a very collegial atmosphere among the actors and myself. It was almost like a repertory company.
The main heist and the shootout were big challenge. We were only allowed to shoot on Saturdays and Sundays. Every weekend we'd have to pull in there, get everything set up, and then pull out of that sequence on Sunday. So you're breaking it up over a series of weekends, which I think is always challenging because you have to come back and now recreate what you were doing a week ago.
The gunfire downtown was truly horrifying sounding. And because of the skyscrapers everywhere, it was just deafening. And it would hang in the sky for maybe like 8 or 10 seconds.
We used 800 to 1,000 rounds per take when we had the cops and our criminals going at each other. I mean, it was quite an amazing sound.
In what we do, we replace everything. In movies, every sound you hear is there for a reason.
So we were mixing in 3 stages simultaneously. And the pre-dubs of all the effects for that reel with all the gunshots came to the stage, and Michael said, "That's not the gunshot."
And everybody was in shock. He said, "How can you not, what don't you like about it?" And I knew what he didn't like about it because I was on location, was that it was horrifying sounding. So the big gun shootout that you hear in the movie is all production sound.
Nothing artificial or could come close to delivering the fear of the sound that the full load made moving through those automatic weapons, and the way the sound ricocheted off the walls of the buildings of an empty downtown. You couldn't manufacture the original sound, and it was quite extraordinary.
The end just kills me. Like it's like that's the love story, right? It's like the only one that could really understand Al's character, Bob's character, and that it's finding the poetry in that and not kind of stopping at the image. It's like, well, what is actually under Chino's need to chase this guy? Well, it's like, it's his twin.
He likes that relationship between this good guy and this bad guy. And the common ground that often happens, I mean, what separates the good from the bad sometimes, is a very, very thin line. He likes you to think, maybe the good guy is really not the good guy after all, and the bad guy is not so bad.
I think it's just great filmmaking. It's a story, it grabs your attention from the beginning, and it doesn't let you go.
Actually, one of the reviews I read said, all things old are made new again. It's cops and robbers. Which I had never thought of the movie that way ever, because it's so much about relationships and it's so specific to a time and place. It's like all good movies, it transcends being pigeonholed.
Oh, I thought it was an excellent film. I thought that Michael Mann just brought it out and served it to you as an audience and kept you interested in which is basically a very simple story, but gave it an identity and a point of view, which was Michael Mann point of view, and it never wavered.
On one level, you're dealing with a crime saga, but also on the other, you deal with the interpersonal relationships that are woven through the entire picture.
This was a huge opera, and we all played our parts, and my part was, the hope that De Niro's character could have of escape and love and forgiveness. There's something so sad about it, so poignant. These people are so lost and they want to be found so badly.
There was this sense of drive to a certain point, move into the inner lives of these people, explore that in a very formal structure. Everything has changed, their circumstances all change. And then that results in resuming the crime story drive and police story drive. The small idea of the film is that fortune does not really enter into it. People say, well, unfortunately this happened, or fortuitously that happened. Well, that's bullshit. There is not much fortune in what happened. I mean, if it enters into it, but it's a minor player in what happens in our lives. Most of what happens in our lives is what we have cause to have happen. And sometimes it's impossible to undo the interlacing strings of causality. So what each character, who and what each character is and sets up for himself, determines what happens to him. And so the conceit of the film is that the laws of cause and effect, what will befall you, is a function of how you think about the life you're in.